Hey, what's up guys, it's Bronson, welcome to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be tattooing a realistic rose, and by tattooing something much simpler I'm able to break down my tattooing process and my techniques, so let's get into it. So I'm using the app Procreate on an iPad Pro, and whenever you're tattooing just a single image, you really need that image to be really strong. So I found this image on reference 87. It's a great resource to use if you're after a particular image in a really high definition, and also it's created by tattoo artists, so there really is that thought in there for images that will tattoo well. So starting off, I was thinking of adding in a bullet hole to relate to the piece below this, but I do end up scrapping that idea, so we're just going with more smoke to carry on that flow, and it's the same aspect used for the flow in the bottom piece, and we're just getting that scale right. You really do want these large areas, and also I don't like doing too much smoke over the center of the rose, so keeping that clear so we can carry that detail through. And then I didn't want to overdo this effect of the bullet holes as well, and that's the reason I end up not doing it, is sometimes you can just ruin that effect by just replicating it too many times. Perhaps we'll do it somewhere else on the leg where it's not visible from the side panel, perhaps on the inside. And I do relocate this bottom leaf here into this area. The tattoo does start a little bit higher up, so just getting all the important stuff in that zone and kind of packing the interesting visual points into this one area rather than having it so spread out, and the tattoo would be quite tall if I put that down there with not a lot of background around it. So keeping all of that packed and just making sure that my flow is all going in the right direction. I'm starting off with a 13 round mag, just getting in some of my background and starting the form of these shadows and blocking things in as well. And you always want to think about what you're actually tattooing and what does this aspect bring to the tattoo. I know that it's not that in focus, and it's really quite a minor aspect just sitting below the rose, more there just to complement the main piece. Here's a little bit of smoke that I missed on the stencil, so just making sure that I map that in. And also the mags are great for finding your focus. With a liner, it kind of restricts you to pulling in a little bit of sharpness, so I wouldn't even use a liner in an area like this on the tattoo. I want this to be quite soft and almost appearing to kind of come out from the shadow. If you were to line things, it would really separate it from the background a lot rather than working with the background. You can see a lot of the time with my mag, I do have it on the side and just kind of working these shadows in the right direction. I can understand visually where people would like to use a liner on a piece like this, perhaps the hard edge of a shadow, but still I feel like it doesn't give you much freedom. These mags are great. I'm heavily inspired by oil paintings and work like that, so these mags are brush-like. It gives you a lot of variation and puts you in control of the piece, and that's really the most important thing. You really need to feel like you're in control the whole time that you're tattooing, and everything that you're doing is intentional. That's what makes these mags so great, is you've really got so much variation, working softly with these larger shadow areas, and then you can also line with them as I'm doing here, especially mapping in, like I said, a lot of these minor out of focus areas. And you can see that I've only used black this whole time, so I really use that to get all of my form in, to block in the shapes and the direction of my shadow. Then later on I'll move through with my other tones and perhaps more refined detail and direction of the shadow. And that's not to say overuse your black and put it in areas where it shouldn't be, but just to get it in there to build off and be your really foundation and anchor your shadows. And then after that, I'd move through with the appropriate value, definitely my lighter tones and things like that. And then also take that next step and making sure that there's that right amount of detail there. Even when I'm in my design process, I'm making sure that my detail is in the right spot. Often with a high-res image, the whole thing is detailed and can be quite hard to read for the viewer, especially as a tattoo. The skin is not paper and isn't as easy to work with. So it's up to you to apply that detail where you want it. You can see now I'm using my light and my mid-tones to get that saturation right and the detail. Here, thinking about the actual aspect that I'm tattooing, the smoke, I know that it's such a soft three-dimensional aspect that I'm always more than happy to approach it with mags, and more often than not I'll never use a liner with it, especially for the ends of these pieces of smoke where it's approaching the edge of the piece. I really like them to be really soft and open. It's great for adding in another piece. I don't have to think too much, I can just connect that smoke up, similar to how I've done with this bottom piece. And the larger mags really get that softness right. And even for these finer details and these corners in the smoke, the mags still achieve that really well. And I think using a liner would be too harsh and bring that aspect too far forward. I would rather the smoke be a minor aspect and do the purpose on why I put it there. The smoke is only in this image to help achieve a lot of flow to a realistic, really still aspect. So having that smoke there really brings the piece to life. And without it, there's no depth to the tattoo as well. It would just be the rose sitting by itself. Applying a layer furthest forward, like the smoke sitting over the rose, really makes the piece a lot more interesting to look at and not so flat. And with flow, it's much more important to have the direction more on point than the object even that you're using. It doesn't have to be smoke or even filigree. It could be some galaxy stuff or a wave, or if you're tattooing a female portrait, have the hair flowing a certain way. But do make sure you're flowing with the body and that the style of flow that you choose to bring into the piece is relevant. And here's some real-time footage of me using a larger mag, so you can see how I'm applying the smoke over the petals, just lightly working it, darker on the outside of this petal where it's more rounded down, and then leaving that highlight there nicely, but still giving that smoke enough shape. I'm not lining the smoke over the petals because that would be too harsh. I know smoke is a really soft object, so I don't really feel the need to have to line it. But decisions like that on the needles that you choose to use is going to create the style for you and make your work look a certain way. So all those decisions are just completely up to you. There's not really a wrong or right way, but the choices that you make are gonna push into a style that later on you develop. And that's one of the great things about realism as well, because once you develop that style and your unique techniques and the way that you use needles, it's really going to set your work apart from other people's, and you'll be able to tattoo any realistic image next to another realistic image, and it's going to tie together great. But that's also been one of my biggest breakthroughs, I think, with realism tattooing, is a lot of realistic stuff looks more realistic when there is a little bit more style. You understand the texture that's there and you apply it however you want to, and it's the inconsistencies in a texture or in something that almost make it look more realistic when you look at other styles which can be a lot smoother. And I think that's the difference between a good and a great tattoo, is having a bit of contrast with your sharpness. When you find an image, you know, a lot of these levels are the same, but it's up to you to make these decisions on deciding, I only want the center of the rose to be really sharp, or a few sections of the leaves to really pull that they're a lot further forward for the viewer. You want to make the tattoo read better than how it's displayed in the design. The same way you have variation in the tones that you're using and the contrast, you want to think a little bit more about what you're actually doing and other ways you can create a level of contrast. So there's your depth and things like that, the depth of view on where these layers are all sitting, the smoke being my furthest forward layer, and then some of these leaves in the center of the rose to be a bit sharper and a bit further forward. Having that sharpness is going to draw the viewer into looking into that area, and then you want to visually contrast that by doing the opposite in an area. So perhaps for your outer leaves, having them blurrier and disappearing into the shadows and the background is again going to contrast that sharpness that you've now added into the center, making the tattoo really visible and contrasted on more than a level of just your tones. That's why, as I was saying earlier, and you'll often see me using, and especially starting a tattoo off with a 13 round mag, it's a needle that allows me to, like I said before, to find the focus and put me in control of that the whole time. If you try using a liner and stuff like that, you really set yourself to that sharp, far forward focus. So a lot of the times, especially with realism tattooing, I would rather use a mag and find that focus and build it up the same way you do your tones. The only thing that I need to merge through the whole piece is the overall flow, so as long as my flow's direction is the same throughout the sleeve and matching the anatomy of the body well, then it doesn't matter the images that are there, because the scale would have always been the same for these images. I could get to the last session on a sleeve and the client could decide that he wants to change the image completely, the last image that we have to go, and that really plays no effect on me, because it's only an aspect, and the style of realism that I would be doing is exactly the same. And you can see here with the 13 round mag that I'm using, I am finding the focus, and I've laid down a small level of saturation with the appropriate tones. When I'm mapping is quite often lighter than the tones used in the area, unless it's black and I'm certain that the tone is black. But mapping and blocking in your areas is really good to do with a lighter tone, so you're able to build up your tones and value and also make room for the style that you're trying to portray in your tattooing, sculpting your tones up to the appropriate value. And that's how I approach areas, and having a process will allow you to tattoo things much faster and more effectively with the same, if not better, result. So I kind of move through areas. I start off blocking in the rough tonal value that's there, and then after I've blocked in my shapes, my shadows and my tones, then I'll go through and I'll start saturating the area appropriately, pulling out these shadows from black to getting my light and my mid-tones in. And then my last step in the area will be finding the detail. And doing the detail last, it allows you to put in the right amount of detail. It happens to all early artists. You see an amazing section of detail and you really want to capture all of it and put it in exactly as it is in the reference. But the outcome might be better if you do less of the detail at a higher quality. So you're not oversaturating one area with too much detail, and if you oversaturate it with this detail, you can make the viewer actually not look at it because the details become too dense, that there's no negative space there, there's no contrast in the area, that it might as well just be a section of background because you've oversaturated it with detail. So you're better to have these small hits in important places. And that goes the same for textures as well. All objects have a texture, and it's up to you to apply as much of that texture or as little as you see fit. And it's really important to understand the texture, the way that it's moving, the direction, the tones, and what's going on. So then it's up to you to decide which needle is going to lay this texture best. If it's something quite gravelly, then it's really good to use a liner or a round shader quite quickly on the skin and put that texture in. I'm not really one, and I used to do this, try and get every dot in the right place. It takes a lot longer, and the outcome isn't as good because I've oversaturated this texture and detail that it's messed my values up in the whole tattoo. And this is something that you'll see a lot, people with amazing tattoo ability, and then you see a section or a certain texture that tattooist just doesn't really understand, and it can ruin the whole tattoo. So it's really important to respect all these aspects in the tattoo and take 5 seconds to really look at it and think about what's going on and apply the needle for the right texture. And now you can see I'm coming towards the end of the tattoo, so I'm dropping back through, and I've taken a step back to look at areas that are perhaps letting the tattoo down, making sure that my saturation's right. And now that the tattoo's complete, I'm able to apply detail into these outer layers that I didn't want to commit to before. So getting the grain of these rose leaves in the right direction, sharpness, and even adding in some values that are darker than the reference appeared to be, so that this top left side of the tattoo isn't just light tones. And I'm leaving the skin as another value and not fully saturating the tattoo with white, just having it in these final hits and really in the center of the rose where there's a lot of shadows to bring these small hits and highlights out from these dark areas. I've used a 5 round liner and really making sure that I've got tight hand movements to really densely pack where I am using the white. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you were all able to gain some knowledge that you can apply into your own tattooing. I'll see you guys next time.